What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. All right, continuing on with the John Armstrong file on Ruth Paine. Next page seems to be a letter dated August 20th, 97, to Barbara and Steve. Barbara's probe article on William Hyde was a great follow-up to her COPA presentation. I hope her article is going to appear in the same issue as mine on the Walker shooting. I feel like we are starting to make some headway on the Paines. A major breakthrough came with the recognition that Ruth's good friend Frederick Osborne Jr. and wife Nancy Osborne appear to be the son and daughter-in-law of Frederick Osborne Sr., a colleague of both the Dulles brothers and Dmitri de Mohrenschildt. Ruth's Dallas friendship with Norman Fredrickson, whose father was with Radio Free Europe, is another link with the intelligentsia of the anti-communist activities of the State Department, CIA, academic community during the 50s and 60s. I think these folks felt that they were genuine freedom fighters, albeit without the sword. After the fall of communism, there was an effort in Congress to defund the Radio Free Europe program, and who should be the staunchest supporters of the continued funding? None other than Malcolm Forbes and presidential candidate Steve Forbes, both of whom are cousins of Ruth Forbes. I'm enclosing some articles and editorials by the Forbes on the RFE debate. Also enclosed is a list of books on the history of the RFE. Hopefully they will reveal some connections with the Dulles, the Osbornes, the de Mohrenschildts, the Fredricksons, etc. Please note that the archival materials on the RFE are currently in Washington, D.C. A trip to D.C. might be worthwhile. I think a trip to the United Nations archival collection would also be worthwhile. I know they have an extensive collection of material because the United Nations collection was the source for the book Blowback on the Nazis in America. Needless to say, we are all disappointed that Ruth backed down from her annual summer visit with Jenny. Jenny has forwarded the Walker article, and hopefully the Hyde article as well, to Ruth for Ruth's comments. Carol. CC Jim and Lisa and Bill Kelly. All right, next page contains, looks like Southwest Bank and Trust Company, Irving, Texas, a check signed by Ruth Paine for $10. To Marissa, I can't really read the name on it, there's a stamp over it. A bunch of stamps on the back. Paine exhibit number 277A. All right. Jesus, people, leave me alone. All right, next is an affidavit. Who doesn't seem to be signed by anybody. It looks like a standard form the Dallas police would have somebody fill out. It says Marina's husband would come and spend most of the weekends with his wife. Then there's a sentence here that's crossed off. I can't read the first couple words. It says, I helped Lee get a job at the Texas Book Depository. That's crossed off. Last night, Lee came in about, and that's crossed off. Through my neighbor, we had I can't read this shitty handwriting. There was an opening. Okay, we heard there was through my neighbor, we heard there was an opening at the Texas School Book Depository. She's talking about Lenny Mae Randall. Lee applied and was accepted. Lee didn't spend last weekend there. He came in about 5 p.m. yesterday and spent the night. I was asleep this morning when he left for work. Okay, so a bunch of thoughts there that she started that she was told not to continue with, and so she crossed them off. I promise that's what happened. All right, next Federal Bureau investigation, dated 3/30/64, number 1. Mr. Gonzalo S. Leon, Plimpton Street, Sudbury, Massachusetts, advised that his wife, Ethel Leon, née Forbes, was a distant relative of Michael Paine. He stated that his wife's father, Malcolm Forbes, deceased, a former instructor at Rollins College in Florida, had by chance been in this college at the same time as Michael Paine's father, who had been an instructor there. He stated that Michael Paine's parents had been divorced when Michael was a very young boy, and that thereafter Michael had lived with his mother. He said he believed Michael had very little association with his father after the divorce, and that, in his opinion, very little influence, if any, was exerted on Michael by his father. He stated that his knowledge of Ruth Paine was limited to the fact that he knew her to be married to Michael Paine. Mr. Leon stated that he and his wife first learned of the association between Michael and Ruth Paine and Lee Harvey and Marina Oswald from reading the newspapers following the assassination of President Kennedy. He stated that he had no knowledge of any association between the Paines and the Oswalds and no information concerning the assassination of President Kennedy. All right. Well, it looks like we have some statements from Peggy Zimmerman, and they're all fucking the wrong way. So I am not going to even attempt to read those. All right. Once again, I don't know if this is new or an old reference, but this is talking about Ruth Paine's sex tapes. John, P.O. Box 702378, Tulsa, Oklahoma. John, are you on good terms with Gus Rose? I just found out from Gary Savage that when he interviewed Gus told him about the 8mm reels of film found in the Paine home. Turned out these were homemade sex movies featuring none other than Ruth Paine. If Gus mentioned other persons in these movies, Gary could not remember. My whole thesis about the Paines is that they were no more who they professed to be than the Warren Commission made out Oswald to be. Yeah, this is the same letter that we read before, but I'll go ahead and finish it. I have a rough draft chapter on Ruth's hypocrisy. This pious Quaker did not attend church activities. Her Quaker role seemed to be limited to the Quaker East-West Committee that worked with the Department of State. She professed to love JFK but didn't bother to go see him in Dallas. She was supposed to be a charitable humanist, but she told author Jessamine West that she was glad Oswald was shot dead by Ruby. West's reply was, "Your halo just drifted away." She was supposed to be a civil liberties advocate, but did nothing to help Oswald obtain legal counsel. The list goes on and on. I would like to use the sex movies thing to burst this goody two-shoes image that has her in second place next to Mother Teresa. I also have a rough draft in the works on how I believe she was willing to serve as a propaganda asset in conjunction with Life magazine and Don Isaac Levine's Dulles' friend. Anyway, if Gus Rose is ready to commit himself to writing on the 8mm movie issue, I sure would like to hear more. I bet he would. Okay. Looks like we have 2 pages from a book. Doesn't say what book it is. Here we go. I don't know what book it is, but it says in the top, Lee, Part 3. In the right side, it says Aftermath. I realized that people would be talking about Lee and the assassination long after both my friend and I were dead, but I appreciated the warmth of feeling behind this remark. I myself was still trying to discover just what happened on that Friday in November when I had my second and final meeting with Michael Paine on Sunday, December 8th. Marina had left the Inn of the Six Flags on Saturday, November 30th, and was now staying with Jim Martin and his family in their home in Dallas. Martin, then still the manager of the inn, had appointed himself Marina's business manager. I'd promised to pick Marina up at Martin's house and drive her out to Lee's grave, but first she asked that I pick up some things she had left at the Paine's house in Irving. Martin and a lawyer named John Thorne drove over to Irving with me to help bring back the things Marina wanted. During the drive over, Thorne and I had a brief discussion about Michael Paine. I asked him if he had heard that Michael was a member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Thorne said he had heard a rumor about that, but that he himself had no knowledge of Michael's membership. I later heard that Thorne had represented Michael Paine on some personal legal matter, and that he did know Paine before November 22nd, 1963. Thorne told me he had never met Michael Paine. Both of the Paines were at home when we reached Irving. They helped us locate some clothes and furniture, Lee's sea bag, Junie's toys, and some other miscellaneous items, and then gave us a hand in packing all these things into the station wagon. After we had loaded a lot of the material, Michael Paine called me aside as though he wanted to ask me something very confidential. "Where is Marina staying now?" he asked. I gave him a rather vague answer. "Oh, she's been staying around Dallas," I said, "but now she's about made up her mind to leave Texas." I didn't want to be any more specific than that. I felt that Marina would let Ruth and Michael Paine know where she was if she felt like seeing them again. In any case, I wanted to protect her privacy as much as possible. But Michael was persistent. He kept asking me just where she was staying at the moment. Finally, I had to tell him, "I'm sorry, but I can't give that information to anyone." Two things struck me about this second meeting with Michael. If his question about Marina was merely an expression of friendly interest and concern, why did he feel that it was necessary to get me off to one side out of earshot of Ruth, Martin, and Thorne, all of whom obviously at that moment were doing something to help Marina? The second strange aspect was his persistence once he realized that I did not want to tell him or anyone else just where Marina was then living. Why did he keep repeating the question? Why was it so important to him to know where she was? And as during our first meeting, I was disturbed by this lack of feeling, by the icy coldness of his eyes. That day, I decided firmly that Michael Paine knew a great deal more about what happened on November 22nd than he had yet told. When the Warren Commission report was published 9 months later, I was even more certain. That Sunday, after lunch, Marina and I got into my car for a drive out to Lee's grave. As always, she asked me to stop at a florist's on the way to the cemetery. Marina had proved that she was able to live on very little money, but now she was receiving all these contributions, and one consequence was a certain childlike, and that's where it cuts off. All right, next is a news article. Two sides to Oswald, withdrawn and showy. All right, so by Kent Biffle. It doesn't say what paper this is. It's kind of zoomed in. It's a little muddy. He was a moody American at times, withdrawn, at times a show-off. He was a honey-haired Russian druggist who just something being beautiful. Or she was a honey-haired Russian druggist who just something being beautiful. They met in Moscow at one of those recreation centers designed by the state to help young people meet. That was April 30th, 1961. He was Lee Harvey Oswald, and he would be in the U.S. on a blood-spattered Friday when a president and a police officer would die. All right, so let's look at the date real quick. So it's April 30th, 61. What happened in the first part of 61? So we have our timelines straight, right? Well, you have Kerry Thornley exits the Marines in October of 60, goes to allegedly Whittier, California. We don't know this for sure. There's no evidence of that. But he then allegedly ends up in New Orleans by February of 61, right? Bolton Ford happened in January of 61, which makes me kind of leery of Kerry Thornley's story. So that's where we're at. That's what just happened. We have the Bolton Ford incident, and allegedly the following month, Kerry Thornley shows up in New Orleans. So that's where we're at. It should be around this time that he goes to work for Kent Courtney, CIA right-wing propagandist. CIA-funded right-wing propagandist, I should say. All right, let me continue. She was Marina Prusakova. She was destined to share a storm of scorn. The couple dated for 6 weeks, and then in a state ceremony, they were wed. The following year, Oswald brought his pretty, slender bride with him when he returned to the U.S. after his 3 years in Russia. Oswald occupied himself with leftist political activities. His wife spent her time keeping house and caring for their young daughter. Saturday, the 22-year-old Minsk-born wife faced her 24-year-old husband through bulletproof glass of a visiting room at the city jail in Dallas where Oswald was held. She speaks little English, but she muttered, "Go away." as 50 reporters and cameramen converged on her. The Oswald romance was detailed for the Dallas News by Mrs. Ruth Paine of Irving. The Russian woman had been living with the Ohio-reared Irving woman since September 24th. Mrs. Paine, 31, is a former Russian teacher who now devotes her time to rearing 2 children. Mrs. Paine, can't read that word. Mrs. Paine studied Russian roughly 3 years at the University of Pennsylvania at Middlebury College in Vermont. Quote, I felt I was fortunate to have the opportunity to converse with a native Russian, said Mrs. Paine. The Irving woman said she had been separated from her husband, Michael, a research engineer at Bell Helicopter, for a year. She said she met the Oswald couple at a party in Dallas last February. Mrs. Paine said that she didn't want to mention names because the host might not declare publicity. It was the Des Moines Shields. But the gathering included 6 or 7 people. What kind of people? I suppose intellectual is a dirty word, but you might say they were intellectuals. Was politics discussed? Yes, but there was no debate or anything like that, Lee told about his trip to Russia, said Mrs. Paine. Did he praise the Soviet Union? Actually, as I recall, he was critical of the Soviet Union in at least one regard. He said that mail he received from his brother had been censored. Some of it, he learned later, he didn't receive at all. She said, I knew he had Marxist views, but I couldn't understand his logic. I disagreed with his views, but I felt he had a right to have them. Mrs. Paine said that she had the Oswalds over for dinner in April, and later she and the wife visited a couple of times. The Russian woman was expecting a baby. Mrs. Paine said, I was sympathetic. There was nobody to help her, and I felt she couldn't or shouldn't be alone. So I invited her, one woman to another, to stay with me. I felt she could help me as a teacher. What about her husband? What about her fucking husband, right? They're together and they're going to have a child, but you wanted to invite her, woman to woman? Like, fuck you. Mrs. Paine said she taught Russian at St. Mark's School of Texas this summer. She had one student, a boy astronomer, interested in learning the language in order to study Russian scientific papers. Mrs. Paine no longer teaches at the school, but tutors the boy privately. The Irving woman said Oswald would come to visit wife and child almost every weekend. He was trying to find work. He got a job with Texas State School Book Depository as a stock clerk on October 15th. Mrs. Paine recalled. She said Oswald was paid about $1.25 an hour for working in the building from which President Kennedy and Governor John Connally were shot. The Oswald baby was born October 20th. All right, hang on a second. Let's do some timeline analysis. Anything going on October 20th, October-ish? No, this is shortly after the Clinton voter registration stuff and all the stuff with Reeves Morgan and McGee's barbershop. So, yeah, this is right after that. Remember, because she was kicking it with Kerry Thornley as he was going down there, setting Oswald up and whatnot. Let me see. Mrs. Paine said she and Mrs. Oswald spent most of their time folding diapers. Mrs. Oswald diapered the baby several times at the police station Saturday. Mrs. Paine said the Russian woman struck her as a homebody sort, mostly interested in the house and the children. She regarded Oswald as a man who wanted to provide for his family but had a hard time doing it. Mrs. Paine's husband, Michael, 35, said he believes Oswald is somewhat paranoid. Mrs. Paine said Oswald spent Thursday night at her home with his wife. She said he played with the kids and acted normal. She said he got up early and caught a ride to Dallas with neighbor Wesley B. Frazier. Mrs. Paine said that when police came, they asked about a heavy cotton blanket found on a floor in the house. All right, let me pause right here. Now, again, if you have a series of events leading to an incident, that the people involved in the series of events that led to that incident, if they're aware of that incident, but yet you determine that that incident it was a hoax or a fraud or never occurred, then what can be said about the people who laid the trail to that incident, who were allegedly aware of it? As we are, as we've just pointed out here. So let me reread this paragraph. She said he got up early and caught a ride to Dallas with neighbor Wesley B. Frazier. Mrs. Paine said that when police came, they asked about a heavy cotton blanket found on a floor in the house. Okay, so it's two different thoughts there. But the first part about Wesley Frazier. The problem with the incident with Wesley Frazier, there's two clear and distinct problems. And those can be branched off into other problems involving Linnie Mae Randall and her alleged friends, which I still need to truly do a deep analysis of this incident because I haven't yet. But Oswald shows up at Buell Frazier's place where he lives with Linnie Mae Randall and her husband. And Buell Frazier said that Oswald wore a gray, more or less, flannel, wool-looking jacket. Okay? That was confirmed by Linnie Mae Randall, who said that Oswald had a gray jacket and possibly a tan shirt under it. Okay? This is disturbing for me because Oswald is alleged to have specifically not worn a jacket and a tan shirt to fucking work that day. Okay? Oswald, from the start of the day all the way till the time he's arrested, is allegedly wearing a white t-shirt with a dark brown button-up shirt over that. The shirt that he's arrested out of the front of the Texas Theater, that's the shirt he's wearing all fucking day. He allegedly leaves the book depository, but no one saw him leave. The statements by Robert McNeil and Pierce Ullman I've thoroughly debunked in my book. Even Terrence Ford didn't see him leave. Nobody saw Oswald leave because Oswald wasn't at the book depository that day. Okay? So this is a major fucking problem with the Buell Frazier story. So Buell Frazier allegedly says that, well, he did say this. He said that Oswald showed up wearing a gray, more or less, flannel wool looking jacket. It would actually be a coat, a flannel wool kind of material would be a larger coat. I don't want to get into my suspect who was wearing that in Dealey Plaza that day, who I also believe is the man who took the ride in the cab, Alvin Beaubouf. I'll cover that at some point in excruciating detail, but I have no evidence that Oswald ever got a ride to the book depository with Buell Frazier. And then once Buell Frazier pulls into the back of the book depository adjacent to the railroad yards and gets out of his car, you have Ed Shields, who clearly was testified to in the HSCA, yells to Buell Frazier, or he hears someone else yell to Buell Frazier, "Hey, where's your rider?" And Buell Frazier says, "I dropped him off in front," meaning in front of the building. That's not the story that Buell Frazier has told us over the decades, that Oswald got out of his truck and walked to the fucking rear door of the book depository, the loading dock, with the package that fit neatly under his armpit. Right? So Buell Frazier's story is a lie. He did not give Oswald a ride to work that day. His descriptions of Oswald getting out contradict the statements of Ed Shields. His statements in regards to what Oswald was wearing contradict the known story. Nothing. You can't believe a single fucking word out of Buell Frazier's mouth. He's a lying piece of shit scumbag who was going to be set up as a second patsy. I don't know why he's protecting these people after all these years. So, when you reverse engineer that story and you start to back up, and Marina says that he left to go get a ride with Buell Frazier, and you know the whole problems with the Buell Frazier story, what does that mean? It means Marina's fucking lying. Marina is fucking lying. Because she was in on this from the jump, from the day she got here from Russia. The FBI or whomever scooted her aside and said, "Look, this is the deal. We know what you are. We know you're a spy, and you work for us now. Okay? Or we're going to send you back and you can go fucking die in Siberia." Because that's what they did in the 60s. Right? So, Anyone who doesn't think that Marina was completely in on this from the jump is kind of fucking ignorant. So, all right, let me continue. Marina told me she had seen a rifle wrapped in the blanket, which she knew Lee had for hunting. There was no rifle in the blanket then, however. Okay, so there's another problem. We know Lee didn't order the fucking rifle because of the fake money order, right? Because it would have been rejected at the post office. There's no trace of it, period. There's no trace of that rifle ever having been in his possession whatsoever. But I guarantee Kerry Thornley was the one in the backyard photographs, and his face was superimposed. To think otherwise is ridiculous. All right, so then next paragraph. I never did see it. I am a Quaker and a pacifist, and I would not have permitted a rifle in my house if I had known about it, she said. Mr. and Mrs. Paine moved to Irving from Philadelphia about 4 years ago. Mrs. Paine said that she and her husband are both Democrats, and I'm very sorry about the president's death. He was the finest president we could possibly have. Oswald's wife was accompanied to the police station by Oswald's mother. Neither would talk to reporters at the station. They were whisked away by detectives in an unmarked car after some questioning and a visit with Oswald. Mrs. Paine said Oswald's wife has said she likes Russia but wants to stay in the U.S. I bet very much. I bet she fucking does. The Irving woman said she was afraid this difficulty would lead to her expulsion, and that would make her very unhappy. So, yeah, I mean, there's some insight. We have some good dates that we can plug in from here. So I like reading through some of this stuff because it makes me realize what things that I need to really dive more into for my future books. The Paines are definitely on the list. All right, next page. Dated 3/3, looks like 97. Looks like an interview. Mr. Ball, that's a lawyer. All right, so it picks up right in the middle. Looks like on page 79. It says, I've got a one Russian book. It says, we took several books from Marina's bedroom, and I don't recall taking any books from Ruth Paine's bedroom, but I don't remember the particular ones. It's very possible I did. I can't be sure. But that's the last one, and I don't have that checked. Mr. Ball, that's the lawyer for the Warren Commission, Joseph Ball. Did you search any other part of the house besides Marina's bedroom? Mr. Stovall, I assisted in searching the back bedroom. I searched the hall closet, and I also looked at several things in the living room and the kitchen and the den. Mr. Ball, did you search the garage? Mr. Stovall says, no, sir, not that day. I did the next day. Mr. Ball says, Rose searched the garage that day. Yes, sir. That's Gus Rose. Yes, sir. He was out in the garage. We were going over the stuff pretty hastily at that time that day. No, that doesn't make much sense. How long were you there that day? How long were you there? I'd say approximately 2 to 2.5 hours, if that long. Now, when you first went in, did Ruth Paine's... then it cuts off right there. Okay, so here, I understand what he's getting at, though. This is the point of this particular document. He's making the point that Stovall and Gus Rose were there, and they had access to the garage, and they didn't take any evidence from the garage other than this blanket that allegedly Marina knew was wrapped around some rifle, right? But remember, this blanket allegedly and the rifle, well, probably not this rifle, probably not the Carcano. The Carcano was seemingly just a prop. It was never shot, it was never fired, it was never used. It was just seemingly a prop, realistically speaking. Because it was brought to the gun range, right, by William Seymour, who it was handed over the fence by another man, most likely Lawrence Howard, right? Lawrence Howard will be mistaken for Michael Bentley Murph, right? Michael Bentley Murph at the gun range, interviewed by the FBI. Turns out he's just there incidentally. He was next to Oswald's range, doesn't even remember Oswald, never talked to anybody that day. The kicker being the difference in the vehicles that they left in, right? So Murph had a really nice red and white new Impala. And allegedly Oswald and the husky, dark-complected man that he was seen there with allegedly left in a, quote, old jalopy, says Garland Slack. So, they were seen with a rifle wrapped in a blanket, tied with that had red trim. Okay, so I don't know, did this blanket have red trim? I'd like to get that answer. But that's what the point of this is, to say that they were there all day and they didn't collect anything except for that damn blanket. That's what he was getting at. All right, next seems to be an essay or an article called All in the Family by Barbara LaMonica. Ruth Paine's father, William Avery Hyde, undertook a Department of State assignment to Peru within weeks of the publication of the Warren Report. His first tour of duty out of the country would last almost 3 years, from October of 64 to August of 67. Mr. Hyde's official status was that of a contract employee for CLUSA, the Cooperative League of the USA. His job title was that of Regional Insurance Advisor for Latin America. Indeed, Mr. Hyde, who for many years was an insurance executive with Nationwide Insurance Company, was the only individual at the time who was accredited to the Latin American division of the U.S. Agency for International Development for handling insurance problems. Thus, he should be considered an important asset of the U.S. government's economic policies in Latin America during that time period insofar as the promotion of capitalism and modern-day business techniques was concerned. All right, so who else have we come across who, in and around this time's primary job was to promote American trade and American propaganda for the CIA down in Latin America? Of course, that's Mr. George Gaudet, or Mr. Gaudet, right? Is that his name, George Gaudet? No, William Gaudet. William Gaudet. William Gaudet was the guy across the street from the Trade Mart watching Oswald outside, who knew everything, that got his visa to Mexico City on the same day, September 17th, that Oswald allegedly did, and David Pierce Magyar. So you see, like, all these people are involved in the same stuff, right? So Ruth Paine, obviously a CIA contractor or CIA asset of some sort, familial asset, connected to the CIA minimum through her father, who was clearly working with the CIA and their interests in South America. Hyde's tour of duty was not limited to Peru. He provided technical assistance to the launching of insurance cooperatives in Bolivia, Ecuador, and Panama. His efforts were directed towards all types of coverage, including life, casualty, automobile, and mortgage insurance, and brought him into contact with Latin American credit unions, banks, and the housing industry. Furthermore, he urged the State Department to consider the development of a Central America common market modeled after the European common market. Hyde's experience with insurance cooperatives led him to serve as a consultant to another kind of cooperative in Peru called the Artisan Handicraft Project. Inasmuch as Peru's major economic activity consisted of folk arts, the U.S. government sought to upgrade the cottage industries and to increase the market for Peru's export of handicrafts through modern and large-scale foreign retailers such as Sears and Roebuck. This in turn would presumably lead to a better standard of living for workers via higher wages and the development of an accompanying infrastructure. Ruth's father contributed to the end of tour report on the Artisan Handicraft Project as it was drawing to a close. This report, which was routed to both the State Department and the CIA, was found by assassination researchers at the AID Library in D.C. Of special interest to the State Department was Hyde's commentary on problems, both politically and culturally, which aid technical advisors can expect to encounter when working in Latin America. These personal remarks consist of only 3 pages, but the content is reminiscent of the report which Oswald made about his observations of life in Russia. In fact, the comparison of the 2 documents reveals Oswald to be the better and more thorough writer, notwithstanding the snide remarks about Oswald's writing and thinking abilities made by Norman Mailer in Oswald's Tale. From this, we can conclude that William Avery Hyde would have been deemed an important source of information for the Domestic Contacts Division of the CIA, which collected data of a sociological and economic nature for its in-house encyclopedias on foreign nations. It is not difficult to imagine that George de Mohrenschildt and Lee Harvey Oswald may have served the same purpose for the CIA following their travels abroad. In any case, we now see that there is more to the Ruth's family background than revealed to us by either the Warren Commission or the HSCA, or Ruth Paine herself. All right. Then it picks up, seems part way through an interview with Gus Rose, Sergeant Gus Rose. Remember, Gus Rose is also the guy who brought Oswald into the interrogation room, searched him, found 2 identifications on him, allegedly, but didn't find the bus transfer tickets or anything else, or the alleged bullets in his pocket. All right, so it picks up, it says, and I could see two people inside, two women. And just before I got to the door, the woman, I found out later it was Ruth Paine, she came to the door and she said, well, I've been expecting you all. And I went ahead and identified myself and told her who the other two were. And she explained that. She went on and I asked her why she was expecting us. And she said, well, just as soon as I heard where the shooting happened, I knew you all would be out. And I dropped it at that point. I didn't question her further about it, but she invited us in. And once again, I asked if Oswald lived there or had a wife there, a family. She explained that he stayed sometimes with his wife, who was there then, Marina Oswald, and she introduced Marina as Lee Oswald's wife. And I said, we'd like to talk to Marina, and she said, you can't. And when I asked her why, she said, well, she doesn't speak English. And she explained that she spoke Russian and that she was a citizen of Russia. I said, well, can you interpret? And she said, yeah, I can interpret the Russian language. I'm a student of the Russian language, is what she said. So I began to question Marina with Ruth Paine interpreting. So I had to assume what Paine told me was true because I couldn't understand. I couldn't recognize, wait a minute, does it cut off there? I couldn't yeah, it cuts off here and it seems to be missing a bunch of pages. Picks up on page 16 from page 5. It says, recognized us as officers, but I did go ahead and identify myself and show her my badge. And she said, I know, come on in. So she wasn't at all surprised. Moriarty then asks, did she indicate why she wasn't surprised, I mean? And Rose says, she said, just as soon as I heard where it happened, I knew someone would probably be out. Looking back on it now, she knew what kind of person Oswald was. Wasn't at all surprised that we were there. Now, I don't know if it's true that she was not surprised just strictly because it happened at the schoolbook depository or because she knew what kind of person Oswald was. Same with Mike Paine. When he came in, he didn't see us. We were standing in the kitchen. I heard the door open. He called out and he said something to the effect of, Ruth, it's me. Just as soon as I heard where it happened, I knew you'd be needing some help. Moriarty says, yeah. Rose then says, well, at this time, there still hadn't been mention of Oswald on television, but I didn't know how to take that, and all explained was sort of similar to what Ruth Paine had explained. We recovered a great number of papers and writings by Oswald at the time. I recovered his camera. Some writings where he had kept copies of some letters to some friend in Russia, and also some writings to him from Gus. From Gus who? It cuts off there. Next page is something totally different, so we don't have any idea. Come on, John Armstrong. You could have done a better job packaging in this, or put some fucking notes in the margin. Jesus. So here, obviously, what he's getting at is the camera, right? He says, we recovered a great number of papers and writings by Oswald at the same time I recovered his camera. The camera being the Minox camera, the camera that Mike Paine said that was taken from them, right? But that his, I think, was taken after the fact, but who knows? There's some obfuscation surrounding this camera, but do I give a fuck? No, I don't give a fuck. Remember, the story of Oswald is a parallel story to the story of the assassination, right? All right. Next one, 12-263. To Director FBI from SAC Los Angeles. Reference. Lee Harvey Oswald, Internal Security. Los Angeles call 12-263. On 12-263, Agent Kazuo Yakura, U.S. Secret Service, Los Angeles, telephonically contacted Special Agent Samuel W. North, Jr. and requested an appointment to be made to discuss George Lyman Paine, Jr. Yakura stated he did not care to discuss the matter telephonically, but briefly explained that his office had received information from U.S. Secret Service, Washington, D.C., that one Mike Paine, son of George Lyman Paine, Jr. of Los Angeles, had been an associate of Lee Harvey Oswald. The U.S. Secret Service, Los Angeles, further advised that George Lyman Paine, Jr. allegedly had been associated with a subversive organization. George Lyman Paine, Jr. is currently included in the security index at the Los Angeles office and is the subject of Bureau File 100-404929 and Los Angeles File blah, blah, blah. Interesting, huh? On 12-263, LA 4023-S telephonically advised S.A. North she recalled Lyman Paine making a statement sometime prior to summer of 63 that his older son Mike was going to visit the then coming summer. LA 4023-S stated neither she nor LA 4024-S had ever seen Mike, and they could offer no further information concerning him. Indices of the Los Angeles office were searched, and no derogatory information concerning Michael or Mike Paine was found. Agent Yakura, accompanied by Agent John Larson, U.S. Secret Service, Los Angeles, personally appeared at the Los Angeles office where SAs Paul Mack and North talked with them. Agent Yakura explained his office had received a telephone call from U.S. Secret Service headquarters in Washington, D.C., advising of the above information and directing that the FBI be contacted regarding the matter. He stated that only information he had of Mike Paine was that he had reportedly been residing with his wife Ruth Paine in Texas, city unknown, and that he had reportedly associated with Oswald in New Orleans, Louisiana, and in Texas. The nature of the association, the dates involved, and location in Texas were unknown to Yakura. Agent Yakura asked if this office had any record of Mike Paine's activities. He was answered in the negative. However, he was advised of Lyman Paine Jr.'s remarks concerning Mike's proposed visit during summer of '63. He then inquired about Lyman Paine's current activities, if any, in a subversive organization. He was told that George Lyman Paine Jr. was currently a member of the Los Angeles local correspondence, but that both the LALC and Paine had been inactive since about March of '62. Agent Yakura advised he was primarily interested in ascertaining George Lyman Paine Jr.'s current residence and employment. Was he at work on 11/22/63, and for a few days prior thereto? He asked if the FBI would object to Secret Service interview of George Lyman Paine Jr. to ascertain that information. He was advised that, whereas the FBI would interpose no objection to such an interview, this office would obtain the desired information and advise the Secret Service. Agents Yakura and Larson were told the information furnished by them to this office concerning George Lyman Paine Jr. and Michael Paine was highly classified and could only be used pursuant to classification regulations. Yakura and Larson stated that they understood and would handle the information accordingly. On 12/2/63, William J. Spath, S-P-A-T-H, conceal per request in parentheses, who has furnished reliable information in the past, Inspection Department, Bank of America, National Trust and Savings Association, 650 South Spring Street, Los Angeles, California, telephonically advised S.A. North that George Lyman Paine Jr. was then employed as a draftsman, Continental Service Company, a subsidiary of the Bank of America, 1335 South Grand Avenue, Los Angeles, and was then residing at 2331 Holgate Square, Los Angeles. He worked from 11 a.m. to 4:30, 11/18/63, and 8 a.m. to 4:30 every day from 11/19 to 11/22 inclusive. On 12/2/63, Agent Larson was telephonically advised by S.A. North of Paine's current residence and employment, and that he was reportedly at work the entire work week, 11/18 to 22/63 inclusively. Agent Larson then expressed his sincere thanks for the cooperation extended to service by the FBI in this matter. Information copies of this airtel are being furnished to the Dallas and New Orleans offices to advise them of the information furnished by Secret Service and to apprise those offices of Secret Service interest in this matter. All right. Next, we come up on a couple pages of articles from a magazine. What magazine is this? This looks like Redbook. And this looks like it could have some good information, but it's long as hell. So actually, no, I'm going to skip over all of this. This is like 7-8 pages of magazine print. All right. So we're going to call it there for today. We'll pick up with some more FBI documents reference Ruth Paine on tomorrow's show. And that's going to do it for me, guys. Guys, I got a stack of books in here. If you're looking for a signed copy of a book, please hit me up. You can email me, Corey@CoreyHughes.org. They're $50 shipped domestically. If you want one internationally, you got to tack on another $30. But I have a whole box of them. So please hit me up. And tune in later for a new episode of Bloody History World War II. And that's going to do it for me, guys. Thanks.